For today's people, propelled by their sex drive, contraception is the biggest problem. Under no circumstances must children turn up before marriage. During marriage, it must be over after 3 or 4 offspring at the latest. Thus, apart from a few years, the couple is living in constant fear of unwanted pregnancy. The conventional contraceptive methods are either not safe enough, the condom, or inadmissible from a spiritual point of view, like the coil, which prevents the implantation of an already fertilized egg cell. The only safe contraceptive, the birth control pill, can hardly be expected to be acceptable to a woman, for it uses hormones in order to keep her in an artificial state of pregnancy over many years. From a spiritual point of view, the solution to humanity's problem of sexuality can only be self-control. The task of today's man is to control his instincts instead of being enslaved by them. How do you imagine that practically? The first step is enjoy sexuality only as the crowning physical expression of true, deep, spiritual love. That is, only with a real soulmate and life partner. The next step is only practice birth control the natural way, by abstinence on fertile days. This is a great and difficult exercise in self-control, which will make your spirit grow. Of course, woman should not only be a giver of physical life, she has her other high duties, and for that purpose there is the most natural abstinence, which can easily be practiced and the increase of the family thus regulated. This is quite possible when high interests occupy the head and the heart. Of course, I expect plenty of opposition. Still, I insist on it. No doubt, in the present state of the family it is quite difficult, but already there are such families, and they will increase in the future. In remote antiquity, people knew how to regulate their families by the phases of the moon. Later on, this was considered black magic, but nowadays even such measures would be better than the dreadful abortions that cripple women, and therefore the coming generations. Having sexual intercourse only when you really want a child would be the last step. But given the current level of sexual desire, it seems almost impossible to take for most people. Pythagoras did not get married until his late 50s. We would like to believe. In the language of Agni Yoga, this means it is a high ideal worth fighting for, that this high initiate was able to control his desire until then. But there is also a prospect for a long-term solution over several generations to curb the sex drive that has become overpowering. We know from biology the function creates the organ. An organ that is not used regresses. Consequently, we may correct the erroneous development of our nature and expect that the instinct will subside over time if we allow it less and less to express itself. It is a well-known law of nature that disuse of function gradually brings about change in construction of form. With the development of the spiritual body of man, inclination and ability to misuse the lower creative power disappears from the more etherealized body. You can actually starve the dragon to death. That is, keep the animal within you smaller and smaller, and finally overcome it by not giving it any more food. It is not possible to remove all the heads of the Hydra with one blow of the sword. Therefore, one must find the way to cause the monster to die of hunger. Remove the monster's nourishment, and it will disappear. This, of course, is a task for many incarnations. But the new immortal man has to plan far ahead into the future, namely for an eternal path. Artificial methods only seemingly allow a carefree enjoyment of sexuality. They are aberrations. Here, as with all human problems, the solution is to be found on the spiritual level. The royal path is the spiritual path. It alone opens up the future. We are not only talking about sexuality, but generally about mastering the lower self. Today's man, enslaved by the most diverse passions and emotions, has to learn this lesson urgently. The eternal individuality must rule the body of instincts as well as the physical body, the body of thoughts and the body of feelings. Sexual education is only one part of the practice of gaining self-control, of establishing the rule of the spirit over oneself. We have already emphasized several times. Within ourselves, a real battle is raging between the animal and the divine. A wrong interpretation has been given to the allegory of the temptation and fall of man. The double-sexed nature of original mankind has been lost sight of. It was the struggle between the higher and lower nature of a single being that was originally portrayed in that allegory, instead of a struggle between two personalities of different sexes. The lower, or negative nature, was the tempter. In addition to the pleasure of the palate, the sex drive is the body's strongest weapon in the fight with the spirit for supremacy over you. Dearly beloved, I beseech you, as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul. We are to reach the higher level, where it is not the instinct, but the spirit, that decides whether and when we have sexual intercourse. Sexual pleasure arises in the head through the images, the fantasies that we imagine in our brain. If we wish to get the sex drive under control, we must learn to master our thoughts. Those who are engaged in spiritual work or interests do not fall into lustful thoughts as easily as someone who is physically active or orientated. If you manage to look at a woman like at your mother, your sister, or your daughter, you will feel no desire. In relation to soulmates, you are looking for unity in spirit, and it would never occur to you to approach them physically. Can you give an example? Yes, Gandhi made many experiments to elevate his being through spiritual power. One of them was, in order to prove that you can overcome even such a strong and elementary feeling as sexuality, he spent the night naked in bed with a naked young girl, usually a disciple. Because his spirit was in a fiery state, his body did not express any desire either. Have you tried that too? Well, that fails because of my wife's resistance. Gandhi as well only did this after the death of his wife. Abstinence, however, is not a sport. You must not exhibit it like a trophy. Many people begin with it much too early. You will feel when your spiritual development is actually obstructed by sexual intercourse. Only then should you consider abstinence. Also, think of your partner. It is not fair to continue to live with him and to punish him all of a sudden with chastity. Gandhi and Ramakrishna sought the consent of their wives before choosing a life of celibacy. Saint Hildegard of Bingen once severely scolded a nobleman who wished to evade his marital duties. Only on a certain level of the hierarchy is sexuality undesirable, because then it actually stands in the way of further spiritual development. There is no doubt that those who dedicate themselves to practical occultism must practice abstinence, as all energies have to be preserved for the development of special abilities. Here, celibacy is the price for further growth in spiritual strength. But then it is no longer abnegation or renunciation, but the highest and unfading spiritual pleasure, instead of a physical short-term one. Precisely by sparing this vital substance, vital forces are accumulated, and thus we sustain creative power within ourselves. Therefore, complete abstinence is expected of everyone who studies practical occultism. This explains why the Arhats lead a life of complete abstinence. Since ancient times, it has been part of the initiation to examine the novice whether he is able to withstand the enticements of the flesh. especially in a moment of weakness. The disciple of the temple is constantly exposed to these temptations in today's world, in which he is downright showered with sexually exciting images. You see, our initiation examination takes place in the middle of everyday life. If a man sets out to gain liberation and then falls back into sensuality, he must necessarily block his way for ages, for by so doing he has veiled his intuition in you and will be no longer able to distinguish between the false and the true. It is one of the great tasks of the feminine principle to lead the masculine principle on the right, the spiritual path. The power of women is great. A man in love, who adores his ideal, loves to be guided. Out of ignorance, the Catholic Church stubbornly denies woman her natural destiny as a priestess. She can exercise this high office in everyday life by helping man in his pursuit of self-control, elevation, refinement, and spiritualization in the area of physical love. If this is what you want, however, you should not stir up his desire by wearing sexy body-hugging clothes like a whore. Thereby, you rob yourself of your dignity as a mediator to the higher spheres. Here is a passage of the teachings of the temple, which also Helena Röhrig appropriated by quoting it word by word in one of her letters. However gross may be the man, he creates an ideal and clothes it in the form of the woman he loves. That ideal is destroyed as soon as lower desire gains the upper hand in the contest between virtue and vice, between the real and the unreal. He may even deceive himself for a short time into believing that it still exists, but it is only a similitude of the real ideal that still lives in such an instance. And the frivolous, oversexed nature of the woman soon palls upon him. Satiety follows, and finally utter disgust. As woman has been the temptation to which the lower nature of man has yielded, it is only as woman refuses to become accessory to his fall and shows forth to his mind's eye the beauties and graces of the higher aspect of womanhood, that man can be compelled to recognize and desire those higher aspects. Man will eventually either bless or curse womanhood, and it will be according to the extent and use of her power to dominate and control his lower nature, whether it will be blessing or cursing. Every woman who helps to save a man from his lower self by refusing to yield to the temptation her lower nature places in her way, thus proving the existence of a higher phase of life than he has previously known, does more to save the race to which both belong than any man, however great he may be, can possibly do in the present age. And it is womankind that will finally be held to strict account for the laxity in morals of the present race. far more than men. His time will come in another age, as it came in a preceding age. The present cycle is woman's great opportunity. So again, I appeal to you, daughters of the King, pray the God within to keep you clean. To all women in the world, hearken to and follow this call from your big sister. Here is a wonderful opportunity for you to assume, for the immeasurable benefit of humanity, true spiritual leadership